Welcome to FailCraft, the podcast where we dive into the messy, real side of success and explore how setbacks become the stepping stones to growth and clarity. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today's guest is Daniel Rodgers, a former program manager at tech giants like Microsoft and Google, who retired at 43. But his story isn't about financial independence. It's about the terrifying realization he had at the peak of his career that he was climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall. He's here to share how he treated that misalignment like a failing program, used data to redesign his life, and now helps others escape the clock to find true freedom. So, Daniel, it's a pleasure to have you on FieldCraft. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Happy to be here.
All right, let's get things started. Daniel, your journey to early retirement started with a profound internal setback. You spent 2 decades mastering complex programs, only to realize you were climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall. So, can you take us back to that moment of realization when it actually hit you? So, what did that shock of misalignment feel like?
Yeah, I think like so many of us, a lot of things were happening implicitly. I wasn't really deliberately thinking about much. I was just trying to do my best with life. Um, Probably before I had any great awakening was just trying to have some level of success financially, career wise, relationship wise, all of that. And my family was not the type of family that was thriving. I was the first to go to university. I had to borrow a massive amount of money to put myself through college. So I leave university with a diploma, but also with, a lot of debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars debt that I had to go deal with. And lucky for me, I was kind of built up this grit, if you will, to do well. And so, I had a job, I'm working, and I'm just stumbling through not knowing like what a 401k is and how to borrow money effectively and how to do all that stuff. But I met someone in college and we got married shortly after we graduated and started a family. And so the size of my life was expanding, right? We wanted to have a house, we're having a kid, and, I'm trying to do the best I can with my job. And then we obviously had lots of setbacks, and I can go into lots of what those were. But what it comes down to is I was kind of on this autopilot mode of I didn't really understand that the thing I was doing was a program yet. I had spreadsheets, I had goals, and I would track some things and I would see that like how painful the mistakes were. They were very quantifiable. But then I decided to make a big move. And we actually went out to Washington State for a video game conference. I'm a gamer. So we went to this thing called PAX, the Penny Arcade Expo, and we're walking around and my wife is with me and we're just walking around like downtown Seattle. And she made what I guess she might then thought was a mistake, but now realizes it was just part of our plan. But she made the comment, wow, this is a kind of a beautiful city. I could see living here. And then, of course, my wheels start spinning and I go, this has been really difficult where we are. But if we could come here, maybe I could fix some of these mistakes and get ahead. And so I applied to Microsoft without actually telling her. And I got the offer. And it was a really good offer, included relocation. Anyways, long story short, we end up moving across the country, working at a big tech giant. And throughout this career, when I'm like, quote unquote, living this dream, doing all this stuff, I realized at one point, to kind of answer your main question here, I'm just running a different grind at a different scale. Excuse me. It was the same problems that I was having before, but at a much grander scale. Yes, the income's higher, but so is the costs. Yes, the amount of opportunities higher, but so are the stakes. So it really became this thing where I was like, wow, I'm going to be stuck on this treadmill forever. I'm never going to be able to get off of this. And it didn't matter how much success I was having. I went from, a junior level developer to a senior level developer, then get to a principal level, then a manager, then I'm working as a product manager, and then I'm working as a program manager officially. Finally, I was a program manager the whole time, but I got the title at one point because I realized that's where I was having the biggest impact. And even with all of those lateral changes and progressions, it still felt like I was just not really getting to where I needed to get to. And then it really dawned on me that the only real solution was financial independence. I had to have the option to either work or not work. I couldn't feel forced to have to go do this thing, because once you're forced to do that thing, you're really just working for someone's agenda based on the rules of the game. They know that you're going to work for their agenda because you need that paycheck. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of people love their jobs, and that can be a great arrangement. But if you don't love your job and you have no other option, that really sucks. And especially if it's a toxic environment. And I definitely worked through some toxic environments, and it was a large wake up call. And it made me realize that having the option is empowering. And once I can get there, once I exercise the option not to work, then I can start getting my time back and doing the things I want to do.
Thanks for sharing that story. So I'd like to know, how did you, after that realization, how did you begin the process of climbing down to start building a life that was actually yours?
Yeah. So the transition, I guess, was really interesting, right? Because there's a numbers thing that you have to do here when it comes to financial independence. It's about having the right money in the right places, knowing what your costs are going to be, and so that you will have cash flow to be able to maintain the standard of living that you want to live. That part is mostly a numbers game. And you can get to that point and still feel that you're not successful, because it's like, okay, I have 15 people telling me everything's fine, but yet I don't feel fine. But then there's the actual psychological work of realizing that you need to make this transition and thrive in that transition and be mentally comfortable with this new lifestyle. And for me, once I started living in it, I realized that at my age, work doesn't stop. It just changed for me. I was now working for myself. I was doing things I want to do because I got my time back. And so everyone had asked me to write a book because they were really intrigued about how I was able to get my time back and make work optional. And so I wrote that book, and I ended up putting my time into that. And that did really well. It won some awards. It got some acclaim. And then I realized, wow, I'm connecting with people through this. And so I started meeting with people online, and they were like, look, I was kind of on autopilot. I feel like I've been in this failure mode. I don't know how to get out of it. Can you help me do what you did? And I'm like, okay, great. Well, the book is your way of making your plan, but let's just talk through. Let's look at where you are. How have you been preparing your journey? Where do you want to be? And so without realizing it, I was doing financial advising. And so from there, I was helping people have at least a plan, and having a plan sets people apart. Because, and we'll probably get into this a bit later because I was a project manager, but as a project manager, my job was risk management. That's most of what I was doing. It was build the plan and figure out the contingencies. How do I make this thing in some form successful? How do I get this thing across the finish line, even if it's on fire? That's the kind of thing I did for a living. And when it comes to financial freedom, you don't want to go across the finish line with anything on fire. You absolutely don't. You need to make sure that you have security. It's about security. And without that, anxiety will live in your heart and everything you do. And so when I made the transition personally, even though all the numbers were good, I had estimated inflation adjusted withdrawal rates for the rest of my life. And I was withdrawing way less than what I thought I was going to have to withdraw. And that made me feel better. And I was still had cash flow coming in, and that made me feel better. But really the thing that really helped me feel like it was okay was just that I was actually doing something with my time, that I had purpose still, and that I was reaching people and helping them and using my time, not just to recover from being burned out at work, but from doing something meaningful. And that was the trick. And that's, I think, the reason why I haven't failed at my early retirement. When I talk to people who have, usually it's not because of money. It's because of a lack of social fabric, or like a connection. You didn't maintain connections or relationships, or you didn't find a purpose, that thing that you really want to do. You just needed a break. You should have taken a sabbatical or something. You need to recover or switch your job. Sometimes people look at early retirement as that break. but that's not how you succeed. That's actually a failure path. So luckily I avoided that.
So, Daniel, living a high status career at 43 is scary for many. So, I'd like to know, was there ever any fear or what if I failed thoughts that kept you up at night during that transition?
Yeah, I mean, why do we ever hold ourselves back in life? Right? It's usually fear. And where does fear come from? Fear comes from uncertainty. And as a risk manager, my job was to turn uncertainty into clarity. And sometimes the clarity wasn't something an executive wanted to see. It was clarity that something would fail because we were missing something we needed to admit that we needed. But the clarity could be there, and then the decisions, basically the decision paralysis could go away. And decision paralysis is such an uncomfortable place to live in when you're just sitting there and you can't make a choice because you're so uncertain about what one choice versus another would mean to your life, you don't understand the stakes or whatever. So for me, I remember not retiring when I was ready. So I was working at Google, and it was a period of layoffs. I lost most of my team as a program manager, and I remember going, wow, I'm going to have to help somehow keep this thing going. Basically, all the things I've been trained to do clicked in, like, okay, tighten up the belt, find a way to make it work. And of course, what does that mean? That means more hours, more stress. A lot of that work that was still there, even though the people got laid off, the work was still there, and I had to personally absorb it. So now I'm doing multiple full-time jobs, and at my level, I'm expected to be able to do that kind of thing. And I could, but there's always a price. And that price was my health. And so I'm basically moving forward in this case where I could have left my job because I had already achieved financial independence, but I kept going. I actually kept working for 6 more months. And that was fear, right? That was a fear holding me back, fear of making that transition, fear of letting people down, people at work, and I'm not saying people are doing this with ill intent, but sometimes you'll have a conversation with somebody, like a leader or something in your job, and they'll say, oh, we need you. And of course, they start saying all those things as soon as they know that you're a flight risk. It's like, you might leave. Oh, you're so important. We want to give, only you can handle this. So, those we call it the golden handcuffs, right? It's like the security you get from your high income or your paycheck or your livelihood. The jobs are designed to kind of handcuff you to the system there. And it can be really hard to break that. And even though all the logic in the world was there, I had to talk to multiple financial advisors, like 99.9% of success, Monte Carlo simulations. I had done all my own rigorous planning. It was all good. I knew I'd be able to do the financial part, but it was the psychological readiness that was missing. And it wasn't until I was on my 20th wedding anniversary. We were taking a trip. We were, at a resort, and my spouse said, what are you doing? We're supposed to be enjoying this. You're stressing out about work. You're not even supposed to be working right now. You were already supposed to be retired, but you keep putting it off. You need to quit that job now. And, thankfully she held me accountable. And that's what we need sometimes. We need someone else, our community, our partner, our just family, our friends, whoever, to help us when we become our own worst enemy, because I couldn't be a contingency for myself. As a risk manager, I think about contingencies. He did everything I was supposed to do, but I was the problem and I needed someone else to help push me past it. Luckily, my wife did that. I did quit as soon as I got back from that trip. That was a really awkward thing. I have a meeting with my manager. He's asking me about this vacation. I said, yeah, I'm going to put in my notice. It was a little interesting. And I tell you, it's like a weight comes off. And yes, there's more worries, there's more anxieties. You're walking away from high income. You could make a lot of money, blah, 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 blah. But I didn't need that money. I needed my time. And my time is way more valuable to me than all that money was. And you just got to maintain that perspective and acknowledge anxiety for what it is and just keep moving forward. That's what I did.
Fantastic. So, Daniel, your book is called Escape the Clock. So, how did your relationship with time change once you stopped trading it for money?
Yeah, when we're young, I think we're so reckless with time. We think, oh, I can do anything. I'm going to grind late into the night. I don't need to sleep. I can just do all this stuff. And then as you get older and hopefully more wise, you start realizing time is so finite. It starts to escape you. And it's like you start going, I know I could mow the lawn right now, but maybe I should ask someone else to do it. Or I know I could probably go on YouTube and figure out how to fix that thing. Maybe I could pay someone to do that. You start to realize that your time has a value to it. It's not just this free resource you can just kind of grind against anymore. And so for me, as I was working higher demand jobs, I realized that my time was becoming more and more precious as a commodity. There's this concept of time banking. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's this idea that there's a society could live off of a economy of time as a resource. So you might have a neighbor who can fix roofs and you might be able to fix a car. Well, you trade an hour of helping them with their car for an hour of them helping you with their roof, that kind of thing. And then it has, tangible, exchangeable value from it. And there's no other currency in there. And you could bank that time even. So your skill could even be, basically deposited and used as needed. I love that idea. I talk about that idea in the book because I think when you start to quantify the value of time, you realize how much you've spent in your life. You start realizing, wow, I have just been spending and spending and spending and spending. And how much of that money through time have I spent on myself? Well, as we get older, we spend less and less on ourselves,
Mm,
sometimes financially, but usually in time, right? And especially if you have a family, right? You give more and more to your children and maybe your partner. You might give more to maintaining a relationship with your friends, your parents. And these are good things to do. I mean, that is time well spent because it's the relationships that will end up having a fulfilled life. But time at work is ephemeral. It doesn't last. The relationships at work don't really last. I hate to say this. A lot of people think, oh, some of my best relationships are people at work. I tell you, a lot of that came from circumstance, and the best way to test those relationships is to not be put into the same room forced in the same space and see how well it lasts. Distance is a good test of time of the strength of a relationship. Now, I'm not saying you can't maintain those relationships. You absolutely can. Some of my best friends came from my jobs, but you have to put that effort. You have to convert that into a real friendship. So a lot of what we get socially from work is convenient. It's comfortable. And so a lot of people don't want to lose that. They don't want to walk away from going, oh, I feel important at work, or I like my interactions at work, or I get this high from work. But guess what? You can have all that outside of work, but you have to invest in it. And so that's when you're using your time in there's this thing called the 5 types of wealth, and social connection is considered a type of wealth, just like time is considered a type of wealth. Well, these things could be used to invest in one another. So you can invest your time in your social relationships. So health is another one of them. And so for me, when I started my early retirement, I used my time to invest differently. So instead of investing it into some job for some paycheck, I invested it into my health. I got my health back. I started being very rigorous with getting myself in shape. I started investing in my relationships. I wanted to make sure my friendships were strong. I had a maximum time with my kids. My son was about to move out, go to college. I wanted to have all the time I could have with him. I wanted to spend it. I started teaching and volunteer teaching finance around the state, meeting new people, started playing in a pool league twice a week where I got to go out and meet new people in a sport I love to do, things like that. And it's great, really powerful when you do that. And then the cost goes down over time because those relationships are established. And yes, I don't have a meeting anymore where I walk into a room and I can joke around with a bunch of people or whatever, but I can still schedule time to see people. And these are the people that I know I want to be there towards the end. It's not relationships of convenience. So I guess what I'm getting at is like, time is such a powerful tool, and how you use it can really set you up in a huge way. And when you just give it away, and I'm not saying people give it away when they're working, but jobs will take as much as you'll give. right? If you're willing to work 80 hours, they'll be happy to have you there. Think about the way that some of these corporations set up their environments. At Google, there is a gym, laundry service, massage services, free food. Now I'm making Google sound like the best thing ever, and it's a pretty cool company. They do these benefits, but they do these benefits to attract world-class talent. But they're really doing that because they don't want you to leave. They want you to stay there all the time. They want, want to get many hours out of you as possible. And when you realize it that way, you're like, oh, well, wow, I am working. I am giving a lot of hours to this place. Well, what are you not giving your time to when you're giving it to your job? You're not giving it to that, maybe your kid or that other, or your friend, or you're talking to your mother, or whatever it is. There's always a decision there. So once you don't have to give your time to a job because you don't have the money as a factor anymore, that's freedom. And that's what I'm trying to help people with. I'm trying to give people the option to not work or work on their terms. I'm not about, I used to talk about early retirement, but look, retirement is such an overloaded word. It's more about financial freedom. Once you have the option to use your time the way you want it, that is truly liberating. And then you can feel, at least for me, I feel very happy and very free because of that.
All right. This has been incredibly insightful. So, for our listeners who want to check out your book, Escape the Clock, or maybe connect with you or subscribe to your newsletter, where is the best place for them to go?
Yeah, thank you. So the best way is at my website, escapetheclock.com. It's at www.escapetheclock.com, all one word. And my goal is just to provide resources for people to help them with this. You don't have to buy a book or anything like that, even though if you're interested, it is up there. And I do think that is the best resource. But I have a free planner on the website because as a project manager, the plan is really important and having a tool is needed. So I took mine and I turned it into a template, and it's completely free. You just basically ends up creating a private copy for you, and you can start working on your stuff. But I also have some other free resources up there. But probably the best way to, if you don't want to just jump right into the book, is sign up for the newsletter. You can do that from the website or go to escapetheclock.com/subscribe. Newsletter's great. It's information right in your inbox every week. Plus, it'll help talk about the other big thing that I do, which is my podcast, also called Escape the Clock. You can find it on every major platform. And I've been basically just breaking apart all these strategies and techniques for financial freedom every single week. And I've been having great guests come on who are experts in these different areas. And I'm even learning some new stuff now. And that's been a lot of fun. So the podcast is a good option. But through the newsletter, you'll hear about the podcast. And you can always pick up the book if that's something you're interested in. All at escapetheclock.com.
All right, Daniel, it was a great conversation with you, and I'm indeed honored to have you on the podcast today. Thank you very much for showing up.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Ezekiel. It was a pleasure meeting you.